Ramp is on the rise, waking up like it hit the Folgers. But can it get up in time to stop the likes of Azorius Soldiers?
Jesus Christ. It only matters if it ladders. Comment below as we navigate through Week 6's metagame shifts. Now let's untap, everybody. So Bant Control and Golgari Aggro rejoined the Tier 1 side of life this week with strong showings across multiple tournaments.
Whereas Mono Blue Djinn finally reappeared in the wild to knock off all those pesky domain players.
And let's not forget, we have some sweet new brews to showcase today, including one that damn near top 8 at the pizza box.
We've got a lot to cover today, so without further ado, here's Azorius Soldiers.
Well, the Soldiers are still cashing checks for their kings, and Falcon took down an MTGO challenge with this weekend, and showcasing that this unicorn bunny ain't dead yet. Another copy made the top 8 of the pizza box, and yet another was in the top 8 of that same MTGO challenge. Now, there isn't a lot of innovation happening in this archetype right now. It's just a question of 2 to 4 flex slots in the main and roughly the same number in the sideboard. Still, when I look at this, I mean, results are results. It keeps winning. We keep seeing these same patterns in the sideboard and the main board and how people are dealing with it. I kind of like that we're seeing a return to the Bunnicorn. Prior to that, we'd seen that shifted out for as many as an extra 2 Protect the Negotiator slots. And we're seeing this shift away from the Yodian frontliners as well and pushing into the Werefox Bodyguard, which I've loved. That card has been a house for me in testing, and it's damn near wrecked me 3 times in tournament play already. So I think it's merited a slot at this point, frankly.
All right. Now, watching this deck over the weekend, it was stated during the pizza box coverage, I think by Damien F16, that he quote, didn't understand why this deck is called Soldiers, unquote, when so much of it actually does forego, like, the Soldier Chieftains, staples of Soldiers, for creatures like Bunnicorn and Werefox Bodyguards, you pointed out. And I know we've covered this before, but can you explain for the folks at home exactly why what this deck is really trying to do now, what form it's taken since it was strictly a Soldiers list?
So it evolved from a hardcore Soldiers list where the only creature type was Soldiers, and it shifted over into this blue-white list that had 16 Soldiers, which allows it to run 4 fortified Beachhead, thus making it the blue-white archetype that gets 8 untapped lands on turn 1 that hit both colors, which is great. It's like it has 8 Tundras in this deck, basically. And more importantly, it allows it the combo kill with Harbin. So yes, this is more of a blue-white, clog the board, let's get value out of the creatures, as opposed to the old build, which was falling apart when people hit specific soldiers that you needed to last. Like your value soldiers had to resolve and stick for a turn before you really got to see the output in the old builds. This new build, Knight Errant, is just about quality and quantity, specifically more on the quantity end. And then you can use Harbin to combo kill out of nowhere. So it's got the soldier vibe still, but it replaced needing key staple soldiers to resolve and stick with engines that just get you more shit.
Okay, that does make a lot of sense. It's shifted to a more, what I would say, flash tempo value engine game plan. All right. Okay, let's move on to the next deck in Tier 1, Domain.
So this is Simon Arbolita's list, and it ran rampant through the Swiss in the Pizza Box Open, ending at 10-0-1. By splitting the finals with Bant Control pilot Soma Kurosi. Now, 2 more copies made it to the top 8 of the MTGO challenge as well, and there are plenty of variants on Domain out there. But I personally took this one for a spin last night and racked up a quick 5-0 in Diamond while taking out the Mirror twice and Mono Red once. This list is really good. This is honestly the best version of Domain that I've played so far, and we just had to feature it here, right? So, of note, things that I really like about this list. It shaved off an invasion of Zendikar, and it started to push more copies of Depopulate into the main. We've already seen 2x Depopulate in the main, but we hadn't seen that shift where they just shave here and go a little bit lower with Courier's Briefcases and the Go for the Throat. So this is a little bit more low to the ground. It also eschewed a mountain to make sure you get that second Mirex, which historically I haven't been a fan of, but given the rise in Bant Control, I can see why this is important. Regardless, what you're seeing here is so many Wraths in the main that this deck just... it's a tidal wave to get through. Every time you think you have tempo on board, they just blow it out.
Yeah, Absolutely. It's definitely shifted, I think, because of the meta response. So now we've seen since the rise of Bant, specific need for anti-enchantment, especially because of Up the Beanstalk. What does Domain do to counter that similar value game plan from Bant Control and other Domain builds that use that card?
So I think Destroy Evil, you're going to see at least one copy in everybody's sideboard. If you really want to rebuild Domain to take down Up the Beanstalk Wars, I think there's a few ways you can do it. Now, we've seen builds that play Jace, and a lot of us have scratched our head like, why do you play Jace in this deck? It makes no sense. Because in the mirror, it's going to come down to decking. The number of times I've won the mirror match on decking is extremely high because there are so many Wraths that the moment somebody gets ahead, the other person goes, nope, reset. Nope, reset. And Beanstalk enforces you drawing more cards. So you're going to hit these game states where one of you has 7 cards, one of you has like 5 in the library, and Jace would just be the end goal. You know what I mean? Like, you can get it down to 20 cards easily in those matchups. So Jace is a really great mirror breaker from what I can tell. I don't know that it's as good against Bant Control because they're able to recover a little bit faster. And if you're really worried about just winning the Beanstalk card advantage war, there's a 6-drop in Wild's Eldraine that has an adventure for 1 and a green sorcery, destroy target artifact or enchantment. I think it's Stormcloud Vanguard. And once you've played that, the other side of it triggers your Beanstalk. So it lets you get ahead on the Beanstalk wars if you want to go that path.
Yeah, I like that tech. I like that tech a lot. I've also used Tranquil Frillback similarly. But in any case, whatever you decide to do, if you are aware of the Bant matchup, then yeah, I think those are good techs. I think this list, the way that we showed it, primarily pivots towards not those matchups, especially in the main. But yeah, you could certainly modify the deck to feature that. Okay, let's talk to us about another one that I'm curious about personally, how it's evolved the way it has. Esper Midrange. What's going on with this deck?
So Patricia Cathalafud, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry if I butcher your name. It's a lot. So Patricia Cathalafud pushed into the top 8 of the Pizza Box Open with Esper Midrange, highlighting a pivot I've been waiting to see for some time in this archetype. For weeks, we've seen this build revolve around the traditional 4 Denic, 4 Virtue of Loyalties, and finally it's time to acknowledge we can lose some copies of Virtue of Loyalty, and we can push into Fairy Mastermind, because Beanstalk Wars are happening in earnest. We've seen the rise of Bant Control over this last week. This weekend highlighted that especially. So another piece to note in the sideboard is the white tech to dealing with Beanstalk are these Lauren of the Third Paths. Hits play, blows up Beanstalk, keeps swinging. Really fantastic. Also combos well with Fairy Mastermind. You just hit them on end step with this, draw the extra 2 cards off of Fairy Mastermind to their 1. It's brilliant. It's amazing tech right now. I love where this list is positioned. Props to Patricia on the iteration. And for reference, another copy to also top 8 the most recent MTGO challenge as well, cementing tier 1 status for yet another week.
All right. Thank you very much for that breakdown. I have to ask, because I've seen the deck take a shift. Without Path of Peril in the sideboard, how does the deck plan to deal with decks utilizing tokens and go-wide strategies? One that comes to mind is Azorius tokens. Is that particular deck small enough in the meta share that we can kind of stop betting on it showing up for the purposes of sideboard calculations, or are there other things that we should think about?
I don't know that we're going to see much in the way of Azorius tokens, but we will see Azorius Soldiers, which Path of Peril hits a lot of the similar targets there. The problem is, if you go into that with Esper Midrange, you're also nullifying your wedding announcements, your Virtue of Loyalties, your Denics, your Masterminds, and your Wandering Emperors when they give out tokens. So I can see why we've pivoted away from Path of Peril, because the tension there is just too high. I like where we're trying to go with this, where we're acknowledging, okay, they're going to bring in things like potentially a Takajia's Welcome to try to outvalue us. Let's have Destroy Evils. Those also hit the Knight Errants of Eos after they resolve. It's not great, but it's acceptable. More importantly, what we're seeing instead of Path of Peril is this shift towards Gix's Command as an acknowledgement that we're going to wreck all the stuff at roughly 2 power, and we have Rafines to help us get past that with some of our board. But at the same time, we need to be able to have a card that's versatile, and Path of Peril is not very versatile for a deck like this.
Okay, thank you. Talk to us about another deck. We've been talking about it a lot already, but what's going on with Bant Control?
Beanstalk Control is back. Soma Kurosi split the finals with Simon Arboleda this past weekend at the Pizza Box Open, piloting this list, and a few other copies placed in the top 8 of the NBL Swiss BO3 tournament on Saturday. Having been one of the players that Soma knocked out, I can say that this list is strong and difficult to navigate through. We'll never really know if it would have knocked off Simon's domain build, but I would expect this deck, this archetype, in force for week 7. The most notable shift here, and I'm going to move this over so you guys can see it, is the mana base. If you note here, we're doing much more of a domain-esque mana base now, and we're making sure we have all these planes for laydown arms. We've cut down on Dreamroot Cascades immensely. We're just upticking high to make sure that these laydown arms don't get stuck in our hand and actually have decent targets. I love that we're shifting out a few copies of Horny Whale, by the way, for a few extra copies of Chromehost Seed Shark. This is also a shift that I think is necessary. Lock Whale's lovely, but you can play around it pretty easily. One copy's spicy, it's excellent. Multiple copies, dead in hand a lot of the time. So you don't want that scenario. Whereas Chromehost Seed Shark, it's answered or get wrecked with a deck like this.
Yeah, for sure. Now, many players have commented in recent weeks that this deck is tough to battle against, especially with aggro-dominant lists. What deck would you take to tournament if you expected a high percentage of Bant Control to be present there?
I mean, if you really want to mess with people, play Esper Control with Siphon Insights left and right, because you can just play the bigger control game and you get duress and they don't. So while they're stuck with all the removal in hand, your Shieldred's Edicts are versatile, their laydown arms aren't. You can go that route. Like, if you want to just play the bigger, better control deck, you can do that. The problem is you're going to lose points against a lot of other matchups by going into that control iteration. So you see the quandary here, like, okay, they're going to play Bant Control, so we'll play Esper Control. Oh, we think they're going to play Esper Control. Now we'll play, I don't know, Mono Red Aggro, something that'll just blow the socks off of Esper Control, and the cycle continues around and around and around.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, fight control with control, right? But all right, talk to us about Golgari Aggro, very popular list. What's going on with it?
So Sasha Kopigny took this to the top 4 of the Pizza Box Open, and it's a very smooth iteration of the archetype. Another copy top 8 of the MTGO Challenge, and we're seeing this list shave down the number of flex slots even further. What I love about this list is you can note that there are 7 pieces of enchantment removal in the main with an additional 3 in the sideboard. I also love that we're acknowledging that we need 3 board wipes for soldiers here, but 2 of them should be Gix's command. And you're seeing that pattern with Esper Midrange as well. This ensures that we have more grindy options for those mid-range mirrors. Lastly, I love that this build has 2 Breach the Multiverse in kind of an inspired attempt to push through Domain by just playing Domain's game plan, but bigger and better. I don't know that it's going to work. Honest to God, I've not seen this particular build take on Domain, but I love the energy that it's putting out where it says, you know what, we're going to blow up your ley lines, we're going to take your Atraxas, we're going to eat your dinner. Like, that's the vibe it's trying to put out here, and I love that it's trying to do that.
Now, I understand your feelings and mine regarding the tortoise have shifted from week to week, based exactly on how this deck has adjusted for the meta share. Now, in the past, it focused on other aggro mid-range matchups, opting not to ramp with tortoise, but instead had plenty of removal. This time, though, I see that it hopes to ramp to Breach, Nissa, the enchantment side of Virtue of Persistence. Is this the appropriate move for the current meta share? Would you advise against it in light of a shift in the meta back towards aggro or some other archetype?
I think it's appropriate to say that the control decks are too efficient at keeping decks from getting under them. The notable lack of mono red lately is a pretty good indicator that you're not just going to get under these decks anymore. They have laydown arms. They have early interactive removal spells. I mean, Domain can put out Leyline of Bindings on turn 2. You know what I mean? You're not getting under them, which means you got to go over them. You got to meet them where they're at. And the fact that this is ramping into that suggests that that's been acknowledged and it needs to happen.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it for Tier 1. Let's shift down over to Tier 2 and start with Blue Djinn. All right, Blue Djinn. Didn't think I'd see this again.
Nope.
Blue Djinn with a third with a third place result at the most recent MTGO challenge. Mono Blue is back. Now, this deck thrives off drawing lots of low mana instants and sorceries that keep the card advantage flowing, and the counterspell's handy. This deck is known to frustrate many opponents' archetypes, and does so with a careful piloting and precision that it's known for. But be warned, this deck is a glass cannon, and I think even more so now with this build. Rid it of the haughty Djinns, and it loses the ability to go over the top. Now, a few, I would say, controversial changes since we've seen this list last. God knows how long that's been. Tolarian Terror is no longer here. Instead, we have Sleight of Hand, which has been reintroduced. The old cantrip, but one that actually gets around the triggered ability of Fairy Mastermind, notably, which we've seen an uptick of recently. Flow of Knowledge is still an absurd amount of card draw if it lands. And of note, because we have the 3 fairies, Spell Stutter makes a good substitute for Make Disappear here.
So one of the newer cards we're seeing in these lists, Max, is Pick Lock Prankster, and this is a card that's really good at filling in your graveyard with ammo for the Haughty Djinn while simultaneously giving you an instant and instant or sorcery into your hand. It's an instant speed adventure, so it's got kind of that weird impulse that you can do at the end of their turn, giving you like 8 impulse effects. Is it good enough to revive the archetype, though?
I'm not sure. It interests me. It's very intriguing having all those impulse effects. But at the same time, I worry personally, and maybe this is just because I'm a mid-range gamer, but I worry personally that it doesn't have enough threats, enough ways to go through and over the top. I liked back when it was in Tolarian Terror, when that was one of the main threats. I liked what it was doing there. So I'm not sure. I would be tempted to go back and try that build again.
Fair. And moving right along here, let's get over to Esper Legends. Max, take it away.
All right, Esper Legends. The main aim of this deck is to overwhelm with curving out on effective legendaries such as Dennick, Rafine, Sheldred. Then win via card advantage and raw power. You all know Esper Legends. However, this version of the deck, still unchanged, right? Still winning, though. Multiple top 8 positions over the past week, including the MTGO challenges. Why change a good thing, I suppose? Yet, there are several changes that I'd recommend to bring this deck up to speed with the activity going on in Tier 1, such as making room for 4 copies of Make Disappear in the main, to counteract heavy board wipe games from control lists. Those lists are in abundance at the moment, if you can't tell. With the high creature count, using the casualty mechanic on Make Disappear extends the usefulness of the card even into the end game. Also, last week I advised shifting from Adeline to Lord Skitter because of the double black mana. I would still consider that. And also the fact that Lord Skitter is a 3/3 coming in, and Adeline, raw, comes in as a 1/4, which makes it prone to getting hit by cut down.
So, Max, do you think that 2-2 split of Go for the Throat and Make Disappear is correct? Do you think we need to shift it over to the 4 Make Disappear, as you said earlier, or do we need to be cutting elsewhere?
I figure we need to be cutting elsewhere, and I'm tempted to make the cut. I know this is a hot take, but I'm tempted to make the cut at Thalia, although I can see why in a heavy control schema you would want to have Thalia. I just feel like the Make Disappear goes into the end game when Domain is trying to play those 7-drop spells. It's still, with your creature base, it still is an effective card. So I would go all 4 on Make Disappear, and find room for at least one more Go for the Throat. You want to go at least 3 on that in my mind.
Fair. Moving on over, Mono Red Aggro. It's back. What's happening?
Oh boy. So GLP took down a 56-player Rap Solo Community Tournament earlier last week. This unique take on Mono Red. And a couple of copies land in the top 8 of the NBL Swiss Best of 3 tourney as well. No top 8s in MTGO challenges or Pizza Box, though, keeping it from rising back into the prominence of a Tier 1 archetype. But it's earned its Tier 2 spot, to say the least. Now, I want to highlight Forge. Forge continues to perform and has really become a red staple in Standard. In the past, it was just firmly used by Rakdos and Sakdos decks, but it has found its place here. Its ability to consistently trigger the Celebration mechanic is a large part of its rise to prominence. Decks are using 1-for-1 removal to slug it out, or alternatively tempoing, then board wiping the aggressive archetypes off the map, both of which Forge tends to dodge nicely. Now, in order to hedge bets in both directions, this deck utilizes Forge along with high damage output in the form of Battle Mouse and Godric with the Celebration ability. And if it can't beat you early, Forge will find some way to clear a path as the game drags on.
So, Max, we talked about this a little bit already, but is Urbrask's Forge good enough, and is Battle Mouse actually a good idea?
This is tough, man, because last week, remember, I was talking about the many ways in which Mono Red could go. And personally, I like this strategy if what you're facing off against is a ton of mid-range decks. That's personally why I like it. You know, it gets the high damage input by turn 3, turn 4. You might be able to carve out a win by turn 4. But I was in favor last week, and I still am, of the Monastery Swift Spear prowess strategy, which this deck does still have in some pieces, but there are some other cards from it that are missing. So I don't know. I'm personally not fond of this strategy in particular. It's fizzled for me more often than it's actually gotten a hit, but I can see why it's popular in light of the mid-range stuff going on right now.
Fair. And that will bring us to my favorite segment, Brewer's Corner. Let's kick things off with a little Esper Blink. I'm going to give credit here to Jack S. Played against you in the pizza box. You got screwed on game 3. You got mana screwed so hard. And if I remember correctly, game 1, you really sort of got screwed as well. So, like, one, this was a cool deck. I saw this. I was looking through it, like, right before our match because you have open deck lists. And my first thought when I saw Twining Twins and Flesh Gorger was, oh, fuck. Like, oh, not this. And sure enough, game 2, that little wombo combo happened, and I was like, okay, well, that's game. A 7-5 that doesn't get hit by Go for the Throat. Not great for a deck in Dimir that forgot to play Shieldred's Edict. That's on me. So it's I don't know that I love all of this build, but I love that we're playing kind of a weird Esper Fae scenario. Like, we have 4, 6, 10, 12 fairies, so we can play a couple of these, like Spell Stutters and Fairy Fencings, reliably, but we're not all in on the fairies. We're using it as kind of this engine to facilitate the ability to combo into Flesh Gorgers as 7-5s or even higher with this Not Dead After All. Either way, cool idea. Oh, yeah. Jackass, credit to you. That was neat. I'm a fan.
Hell yeah, I'm a fan too. Any way that you can modify those 3 color sets, I'm a fan. We've been seeing a lot of Esper Legends lately. This is pretty creative. But I want to talk to you guys about a deck, Orzhov Spirit. Credit to Athena the Bun, very clever name, by the way. Tripped me up at first when I saw it. Orzhov Spirit, we're featuring some of my favorite cards on the top end here. Portal, Kaya, and this one that you may not know of, the Invasion of Tolvada, which not only is a 5-drop reanimator spell, but on the flip side, +1/+0 and lifelink to your tokens. I mean, that's insane. And then in addition to that, at the beginning of your end step, you're able to put in a body that has flying, 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. So in conjunction with some other cards, this can get out of hand pretty quick. And we've got the 4 wedding announcements. We've got the Sarah Paragon mono white mid-range game plan at play, and of course Wandering Emperor, the RME in a can. So I feel like the top end of this deck complements what it's trying to do in the early and mid game really well, and you rarely see that. You typically see from Orzhov a pile of cards. Rarely do you see a pile of cards that work really well together synergistically.
Yeah, that's a really neat list. I know the mana base needs some tuning. Athena, I didn't get to it. My apologies. But I love where you're trying to go as a concept with that deck, and I'm very curious if you have a revised iteration over the past week from testing, and if so, drop it below in the comments because I want to see it. It's cool. Now, moving right along, this is Rakdos Theft. This is one of my own creations. It didn't work, but it came close. So it had, like, it was coin flipping with a lot of the popular archetypes, but it was not quite taking over the game the way I'd hoped it would. The idea here is we don't really play much in the way of threats. We steal their shit. We use Decadent Dragons to steal their shit. And Chandra is kind of nuts in this deck. One, it lets you double adventure here on these during their turn. Double copies of all these spells just feels amazing, especially Breach the Multiverse. I don't know. I love the deck. If you can get a Chandra down and it sticks 1 turn, I've yet to lose a game as long as it can stick 1 turn. The problem is if it doesn't stick, you don't have a lot of ways to generate card advantage, and you don't have a lot of ways to deal with very specific threats here and there. So it's kind of glass cannon-y weirdly, and I don't know that it's ever going to be tier 1, but it's fascinating, and I'm keeping it around just in case the new set drops a few goodies in our lap that finally let it, get back into the game.
Oh yeah, I like it. And when I first saw the list, I was like, how are they going to make use of these 4 Chandras? But I think the Decadent Dragon, Expensive Taste, I've been in love with that card since day one while it's Veldr. I've been looking for a shell to make it work. And Rakdos just seems like a natural fit, of course.
It helps when you have Celestis so that you can actually play cards from it that aren't in your colors.
Yep.
But yes.
Yep.
That again, moving right along here, we have mono white vehicles. Max?
All right. Okay, Scoop gets the credit for this one. Went 5-2, nearly top 8ing the pizza box. Yeah. What can I say? Any deck with Patchwork Automaton, you already know Ginger Brood's going to be in there. You know, the Yodian Frontliner, any of your cheap artifact creatures, right? But what I didn't expect to see, highlight that card in the 3rd drop slot, the Convoke Halo Hopper. Very interesting. Never seen anybody make use of this common, but pretty effective. I mean, this card is often free. And cards that are free, I mean, we don't see that often in Magic anymore. I think Ornithopter's like the last one, but that I can remember of. But yeah. And then, of course, in the top end, Plated Onslaught, Affinity for Artifacts, giving you the big strike to be able to go in and just wipe out your opponent in the end. Knight Errant of Eos also on the top end. These 2 cards, I think, work very well with the deck. And then the mana base, I think you've got, 4 Mishra's Foundries as well to kind of add to that pile.
Yeah, I love what that deck's doing. I assume it just has a bear of a time dealing with things like Sunfall and Depopulate, but outside of Wrath effects, this deck looks like it gets out and just ranches you. Like the Plated Onslaught, I haven't seen Affinity in so long, Max. In so long.
Yeah.
I've been waiting forever for this shit.
And you can't go for the throat. You can't go for the throat anything in that deck.
Yeah, I think the only go for the throat target is the Knight Errant of Eos, literally. I think that's literally the only target you get. Anyway, that'll bring us to our final... Corner. Yeah, that'll bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Max, we have looked at 12 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 7 of Wild Standard?
Well, we are 1 month out now, and it's exciting to say this. We're 1 month out now from the release of Caverns of Ixalan. We find ourselves, however, in a varied meta at this point, and you typically don't see that. You typically see a lame duck period before a set release. Does this make it a healthy standard? We're seeing a wide variety of decks. We're tracking so many different decks. Some players still disagree that it is. Now, while we clearly have lots of representation across the varied archetypes, the common argument I've been hearing claims that standard is stale because a handful of staples are the only cards seeing significant play. Whether you agree with this or not, rest assured the new set will bring new dynamics, hopefully churn the card pool so that new cards can see play, and old cards from older sets in Standard can see play. Just some examples. Recently, right, we've seen brand new cards come into Standard. Virtues of Loyalty and Persistence, Blossoming Tortoise, Up the Beanstalk has made a heavy impact. We've even seen cards become staples from older sets such as Urbrass Forge. So is Standard healthy? If you go by those metrics, I personally believe so. Lastly, I'd like to address the Tier 2 archetypes from today. Now, while Mono Blue has come back to play seemingly out of nowhere, I feel like it should revert to that non-Fey build we saw before, and I want to test this personally and see how well it does in the current Standard. Dimir Midrange was its threat. It isn't around. I tried playing it this past week, and I could have done really well if not for some technical bugs on Arena, but I don't really see the deck that often. That was really the deck keeping it down. Esper Legends continues to vex me personally. I keep being tempted to turn it into Esper Midrange whenever I'm building with it, so maybe Legends players know something I don't. It's hard to tell, but if the deck itself, Esper Legends, is going to survive, it will need to counter the control strategies better, hedge against the bad draws and the bad curve outs that sometimes do happen with that deck. Mono Red is in a position of doing well given certain meta shares, so I can understand why people are playing it. Esper Midrange or Bant don't show up, for example, it tends to do well. Now, the question for me with Mono Red, does it have what it takes to crush soldiers? And so far, the answer has typically been no, and I don't predict that this will change before Caverns of Ixalan. But after saying all that, I have to say, don't take my word for it. Leave us a comment down below while you're there, subscribe, and consider joining the Rebellion by supporting our efforts with a $1 monthly donation. If you join, you can get Rebellion emotes to show off during premieres and a badge to let everyone know your Rebel status. Now, Riktus, we were witness to an array of shifts this past week. Do you predict any more after this coming weekend?
Oh boy. So, in the comments, y'all asked for a longer final analysis, so stick with me here for a moment while I cover Tier 1. For me, Golgari Aggro feels great until you go up against Domain or Bant Control. I've had little luck in either of these matchups without extensive slants in the main board, and if you go that far, you're cutting margins against the rest of the format, which feels a little rough to say the least. It's not where I'm going to be this upcoming weekend at the Jankathon tournament. Esper Midrange, on the other hand, it's great when there isn't a target on its back, but that hasn't been the case for quite some time now. This is a deck that can contain many opposing archetypes, but I wouldn't want to take it against proper control due to the 7-ish mostly dead removal spells in the main and the lack of proper card advantage, because it relies mostly on positional advantage, which isn't great when people are just ranching you with card advantage through Sunfalls and up the beanstalks. Now, Azorius Soldiers, strongest tempo play that doesn't share the weaknesses of Mono Blue Djinn, but it will still come down to how hard your opponents want to hate you out. Try having to counter 3 to 4 Wrath effects a game, or just push through Archangel of Wraths on end. You will know that experience can be absolutely miserable. Bant Control might actually be the best deck in the format now that the mana base issue is getting resolved. That said, control mirrors are kind of an exhausting affair, and I expect a strong number of semi-pros to embrace this archetype, which in turn may lead to an opening for Esper Control to take down these Control V control mirrors, but that cycles back into openings for other archetypes, which we talked a little bit about earlier. Domain. Consistent, with the best curve out in standard to my knowledge, and all the tools to take on the format. I'll probably be embracing our Friction Overlords with this deck over the weekend, although I do have a few spicy little tech tweaks to make before I take that stage. So will we see the Rebellion take down a tournament this weekend, and what will win the October qualifier on Arena? We'll be back next week to discuss the results with you, as always. Now, last but not least, guys, as Max said earlier, we have launched the Rebellion YouTube membership tiers for the low, low price of 99 cents a month. You can help a streamer eat every day, and God knows our diets could use it. For the price of $2.99 a month, you can buy our Graphics Queen a coffee each month, and in case you're wondering, she does keep this whole ship afloat. For real, though, consider joining these membership tiers because it helps us keep the content going. Just click that little join button at the bottom and support the Rebellion however you can. We love you, and we thank you for watching. Until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.